Courtroom number 7 in Jefferson County, Kentucky, was shrouded in the heavy silence that precedes important sentences. Judge Margaret Sullivan, 62 years old, with neatly combed blonde hair and a decades-long reputation as one of the state's strictest magistrates, adjusted her reading glasses as she reviewed the documents before her. Across the room, handcuffed and wearing the orange prison uniform, stood Daniel Cross, a 38-year-old man with tattooed arms, a shaved head, and a resigned expression that told more stories than any document could recount. The case was relatively simple on the surface. Daniel had been arrested 3 months earlier for drug possession and parole violation. It wasn't his first offense, and his criminal record showed a worrying pattern of self-destruction that had begun years ago. The public prosecutor had requested the maximum sentence, arguing that Daniel represented a continuing danger to society and had already been given too many chances. The public defender, a young lawyer named Rebecca Torres, had done her best with a virtually impossible case, but both knew the odds were stacked against their client. Margaret looked at Daniel over her glasses. She had seen hundreds of men like him throughout her career, men who seemed determined to waste their lives, who chose the wrong path repeatedly until there were no turning back. She firmly believed in second chances, but she also believed in responsibility and consequences, and Daniel Cross had exhausted his chances. "Mr. Cross," she began in that firm voice that had silenced countless courtrooms over the years, "before I pronounce the sentence, I would like to give you one last opportunity to speak. Is there anything you wish to say to the court?" Daniel rose slowly, the chains clinking as he moved. He looked tired, not just physically, but in a deeper way, as if he carried an invisible weight that constantly pressed down on him. For a moment, Margaret thought he would simply remain silent, accepting his fate without a fight. But then he began to speak, his voice hoarse and low. "Your Honor," he said, "I have no excuses. I messed everything up, repeatedly. I know it. I know what I did was wrong, and I know I've had more chances than I deserve. I'm not going to stand here and try to convince you that I'm a victim, or that circumstances forced me into this. These were my choices, all of them." He paused, swallowing hard, and Margaret could see something glint in his eyes, something that seemed genuine. "I just wanted you to know that I was trying. Before I was arrested this time, I'd been clean for almost 6 months. I'd gotten a job at a mechanic's shop. It wasn't much, but it was honest work, and I was going to the meetings every week without fail. But then something happened, something that brought me back to the wrong places, with the wrong people, and I made a stupid choice." Margaret listened in silence. She had heard similar speeches, countless times, words of repentance that sounded sincere at the moment, but rarely translated into real change. She was preparing to interrupt him and proceed with the sentence when something caught her attention. As Daniel gestured with his shackled hands, the sleeve of his prison uniform rose slightly, revealing part of a tattoo on his right forearm. Normally, Margaret wouldn't pay much attention to a defendant's tattoos. Many of the men and women who passed through her office had bodies covered in ink, gang symbols, names of loved ones, or simply body art without any particular meaning. But something about this particular tattoo made her heart stop for a moment. She couldn't see clearly from where she was sitting, but there was something familiar about that partially visible design. "Mr. Cross," she interrupted abruptly, "please come closer to the bench." Daniel seemed confused, as did his public defender and the prosecutor. It wasn't common for a judge to ask a defendant to approach in that manner, especially when she was about to pronounce a sentence. But Margaret had that determined look that everyone in the room knew well, the one that left no room for questioning. Daniel approached slowly, the chains restricting his steps. As he drew closer, Margaret leaned forward slightly. "Your tattoo," she said, pointing to her arm. "May I take a closer look?" Hesitantly, Daniel raised his arm as high as the handcuffs allowed and pulled up his sleeve. What was revealed caused Margaret to completely lose the composure she had so carefully maintained for decades. The tattoo showed the intricately drawn wings of an Air Force pilot, with a date underneath and geographical coordinates. But that wasn't all. Around the wings were specific details, symbols that only someone with deep military knowledge would recognize, markings of a specific unit, of a specific mission. Margaret's hands began to tremble as she rose from her chair. The entire room was now in absolute silence, everyone confused by the judge's completely unusual behavior. "Where did you get that tattoo?" she asked, her voice breaking slightly. What does it mean? Daniel looked at her, equally confused. I got it done years ago, Your Honor, when I was still serving. I was a helicopter pilot in the Air Force. These coordinates, he pointed to the tattooed numbers, are from where my last mission took place, in Afghanistan. It was my last mission because after that, I couldn't fly anymore. Not for physical reasons, but for other reasons. Margaret sat down again, but her hand went to the medallion she always wore around her neck, hidden beneath her judicial robe. With trembling fingers, she opened it, revealing a small, weathered photograph of a young soldier in military uniform. What was his mission that day? She asked, her voice barely louder than a whisper. Daniel looked at her for a long moment, and something in his eyes shifted, as if he were being transported back in time to a place he had desperately tried to forget. It was a rescue mission, he said slowly. A ground patrol had been ambushed. There were casualties, many casualties, and there were wounded who needed urgent medical evacuation. I was the pilot of the evacuation helicopter. We entered a hot zone, under heavy fire. We managed to get 7 men out of there. 3 were already dead, 4 were wounded, some seriously. He paused, closing his eyes as if reliving every second of that moment. One of them was in particularly critical condition. He had taken shrapnel from an explosion in his chest and legs. He was losing a lot of blood. The doctor in the helicopter said he probably wouldn't survive the flight back to base, but we kept him alive. I flew faster than I should have, took some risks, but we managed to get him to the field hospital in time. I was told later that he survived, that he was transferred to a better hospital in Germany, and then back to the United States. Margaret was crying now, tears streaming freely down her face as she clutched the locket in her hand. Do you remember his name? She asked, already knowing the answer. Daniel thought for a moment. Sullivan, he finally said. Private First Class James Sullivan. I remember because one of the other soldiers in the helicopter kept repeating his name, trying to keep him conscious. He kept saying, "Hold on, Sullivan. You'll see your mother again. Think of your mother." The courtroom erupted in confused murmurs. The public defender seemed completely lost, and the prosecutor had dropped his documents. Margaret stood up again, this time skirting the bench and walking directly to Daniel. She violated every existing judicial protocol, but at that moment, none of that mattered. She took his handcuffed hands in hers and looked him in the eyes. James Sullivan was my son, she said, her voice choked with emotion. You saved my son that day. You brought my boy back home. He went through months of surgeries and rehabilitation, but he survived. He's alive today because of you. The silence that followed was deafening. Daniel was visibly in shock, looking at the judge as if he couldn't process what he was hearing. Your son, he repeated slowly. James is your son. Margaret nodded, still holding his hands. He told me about that day. He said he thought he was going to die, that he was sure he would never see me again. But then he heard the sound of the helicopter, felt himself being carried away, and heard the pilot's voice telling the doctor that no one would die in his helicopter that day. You said that. You promised you would bring everyone back alive. Daniel closed his eyes, and for the first time since entering the courtroom, his defenses completely crumbled. Tears began to stream down his face as he nodded. I said that, he confirmed, and I kept that promise that day. But after that day, I couldn't keep promises anymore, not even to myself. Margaret guided him back to the defense table, still holding his hands. The entire room was watching, witnesses to something extraordinary, something none of them would ever see again. When they reached the table, Margaret finally released his hands and returned to her seat on the bench, but something fundamental had shifted in the atmosphere of the room. Mr. Cross, she began, her voice now firmer but still heavy with emotion. I need to know what happened. How did you go from being that man, that hero who risked his life to save my son and 7 other men, to being here today, facing drug charges? Daniel took a deep breath, wiping the tears from his face. When I returned from that mission, he began, I was different. Not immediately, but over time. I had seen a lot, lost many friends, carried many bodies. That mission where I saved your son wasn't the first, and there were others afterward. But we didn't always manage to save everyone. There was a mission, a few months later, where we lost 4 men. I did everything. Right? Flew perfectly, but they were already badly wounded. And when we arrived, it was too late. He stopped, the pain evident in his voice. I started having nightmares. Every night I relived those missions. I saw the faces of the men I couldn't save. I heard the sounds, smelled the smells. The army offered help, Therapy. But I was young and stupid, and I thought I could handle it alone. I was wrong. Margaret listened attentively, and suddenly many things began to make sense. Daniel's story wasn't just about bad choices or moral weakness. It was about untreated trauma, about a man who had given everything for his country and hadn't received the support he needed when he returned home. I was honorably discharged from active duty, Daniel continued, but I didn't feel honored. I felt broken. I started drinking to sleep. Then, when alcohol wasn't enough, I turned to other things. I lost jobs. I lost relationships. I lost my family's trust. Every time I looked in the mirror, I saw that pilot who promised that no one would die in his helicopter, and I knew I had become the exact opposite of who I was. Daniel's public defender, Rebecca, stood up. "Your Honor," she said, her voice trembling, "I was unaware of my client's extensive military service. It wasn't in our files. I would like to request a postponement so that we can present additional evidence regarding Mr. Cross's military history and how it may have contributed to his subsequent problems." But Margaret raised her hand. "That won't be necessary, Counselor Torres. I've heard enough." She looked at Daniel again, that tattooed, handcuffed man who had saved her son's life. "Mr. Cross, this court is fully aware that the system frequently fails our veterans. We send them to war, ask them to do impossible things, to see unimaginable things, and then expect them to come back and reintegrate into society as if nothing had happened." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "But that doesn't excuse your actions. You committed crimes. You violated your parole, and there are consequences for that. However, I also believe in redemption. I believe that the man you were that day in Afghanistan, the man who promised that no one would die in your helicopter, is still somewhere inside you." Daniel looked at her hopefully for the first time. "Your Honor," he said, "I just want a chance to find that man again. I know I can. I know I can be better." Margaret nodded. "So here's what we're going to do. I'll suspend your prison sentence, but with very strict conditions. You'll be placed in a specialized program for veterans with post-traumatic stress disorder and substance abuse problems. You'll be required to participate in individual and group therapy. You'll be drug tested weekly. You'll be required to participate in a veterans employment program and hold down a job. And you'll do community service, working with other veterans who are going through similar difficulties." She leaned forward, her gaze intense. "But if you violate any of these conditions, if you fail a single drug test, if you miss a single therapy appointment, you will return to this room, and I will have no choice but to impose the maximum sentence. Do you understand?" Daniel nodded vigorously, tears streaming down his face again. "Yes, Your Honor, I understand, and I promise I won't let you down. I'll make this work this time." Margaret banged the gavel. "Let it be recorded that the court suspends the prison sentence of the defendant Daniel Cross under the conditions set forth. Officer, please remove Mr. Cross's handcuffs." As the handcuffs were removed, Margaret stepped down from the bench once more. She approached Daniel and extended her hand. He shook it firmly, both of them with tears in their eyes. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for giving me another chance. Thank you for believing in me." Margaret smiled through her tears. "You saved my son. You returned the most precious gift I have. Now I'm giving you the chance to save yourself. Don't waste it, Daniel." In the months that followed, Daniel rigorously complied with all the conditions of his parole. He attended all therapy sessions, passed all drug tests, and began working in a program that helped veterans transitioning to civilian life. For the first time in years, he began sleeping better at night. Nightmares still came occasionally, but now he had tools to deal with them and a support system that understood what he had been through. Margaret closely monitored his progress, receiving monthly reports from his probation officer. She also did something she had never done before in her career. She invited Daniel to dinner at her home. When James, her son, learned who Daniel was, he insisted on meeting him. The meeting between the two men was deeply emotional. James, now in his 30s, working as a teacher and engaged, embraced the man who had saved his life on that terrible day in Afghanistan. "I always wanted to find you," James said to Daniel, his voice full of emotion. "I always wanted to thank the pilot who brought me home. I looked for you, but I couldn't find you." Daniel shook his head. "I wasn't easy to find. I was hidden, from myself more than from anyone else. But your mother found me. Or maybe fate found us." Throughout that night, the three shared stories, tears, and laughter. James told Daniel about his recovery, about the 23 surgeries he had to undergo, about the years of physical therapy, but also about how all of that had led him to become a teacher, to want to help others in the way he had been helped. Daniel, in turn, shared his journey through trauma and addiction, but also about his renewed determination to honor the man he had been. "I carry this tattoo," he said, touching his arm, "as a reminder of the best day of my military career, the day I fulfilled my promise. And now, thanks to your mother, I have the chance to make new promises and keep them." A year. After that day in court, Daniel stood before the same Judge Margaret Sullivan, but this time the circumstances were completely different. He was wearing a clean suit, had been sober for over a year, and had a stable job as an aircraft mechanic at a small local airport. More importantly, he had begun giving talks at schools and community centers about his experience as a veteran and his struggle with addiction. "Mr. Cross," Margaret said with a smile, "it's a pleasure to see you back in my courtroom under such positive circumstances. You have fulfilled all the terms of your parole exemplarily. You not only followed the rules, but exceeded all expectations. According to the reports I've received, you have become a mentor to other struggling veterans, and your work has made a genuine difference in their lives." She paused, looking at the documents before her. "Therefore, it is with great pleasure that I declare that your parole has been successfully completed. Your criminal record will be reviewed, and you will have the opportunity to request the removal of certain convictions from your record, given your military service and exemplary rehabilitation. You are free, Mr. Cross, truly free." The courtroom, which was packed with people who had come to support Daniel, including James and several veterans he had worked with, erupted in applause. Daniel wiped the tears from his face, shook hands with his public defender who had become his friend, and then approached the bench, where Margaret was sitting. "Judge Sullivan," he said, his voice firm and clear, "I know that thanking you isn't enough. You gave me more than a second chance. You gave me my life back. You helped me find the man I used to be and become an even better man. I promise I will continue to honor this opportunity every day for the rest of my life." Margaret stepped down from the bench one last time and hugged Daniel. "You saved my son," she whispered, "and in the process, you allowed me to save you. I guess we're even now." The story of Daniel Cross and Judge Margaret Sullivan spread rapidly throughout the community. Local newspapers published articles about the incredible encounter in court and Daniel's subsequent transformation. Veterans organizations began using his story as an example of what is possible when society provides adequate support to those who have served. Daniel was invited to speak at events, on military bases, and even to testify before legislative committees about the need for better mental health resources for veterans. But for Daniel, the most significant moment came when he was invited to James's wedding. On the wedding day, as James stood before the altar with his bride, he made a point of publicly acknowledging Daniel. "There's a man here today," James said during their ceremony, "who is the reason I can be here. Years ago, in a place far, far away, he risked his life to bring me home. He didn't know me. I was just another wounded soldier to him. But he promised that no one would die in his helicopter that day, and he kept that promise." James looked directly at Daniel, who was sitting among the guests with tears in his eyes. "Daniel, you gave me the chance to be here today, to marry the love of my life, to have a future. And when you were at your darkest moment, my mother had the chance to return that gift. This is not coincidence. It's destiny. And I am grateful every day for the role you played in my life." After the ceremony, during the reception, Daniel found himself surrounded by people who wanted to hear him talk about his experience. But the moment he cherished most was when James's mother, Margaret, approached him with a small box. "I wanted to give you this," she said, opening the box to reveal a military medal. "That belonged to James," she explained. "He received it for valor in combat, but he insists you should have it. He says the real valor that day was yours, the courage to fly into a combat zone to save men you didn't know." Daniel shook his head. "I can't accept this. This medal belongs to James. He earned it through his sacrifice." But Margaret placed his hand on the box. "Then accept it as a symbol that you are more than your worst days. You are also your best days, and never forget that." That night, when Daniel returned to his small apartment, he placed the medal beside his bed, where he could see it every morning when he woke up, and next to it, he placed a photo taken at home, James's. Moment showing him, Margaret, and James together smiles.